From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
From controversial signal chats to turmoil over tariffs, there's never a slow news day in President Trump's Washington. But even as Democrats fight the administration across many fronts, the party's lawmakers are deeply divided over what their strategy should be, and polls show many of their own voters aren't happy either. So how should Democrats navigate a GOP-controlled Washington, and do they need new leadership to move forward? We'll ask our guest on this week's Newsmakers, Rhode Island Congressman Seth Magaziner. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi, Congressman Seth Magaziner from Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District. Welcome back to the show. It's good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the big headline of the week, the Signal controversy. Trump administration officials participated in a Signal group chat discussing details of a pending attack on Yemen. In your opinion, is this a firing offense for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth?
Yes, absolutely. Listen, everybody who was on that Signal chat should have known better, because we are lucky that American service members did not lose their lives. The people who are on this chat, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, and others, these are people who our adversaries are actively trying to hack, surveil, etc., 24/7, and they should know that. So our adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, they are very good at spycraft. They're not good at everything, but they are good at this. And to have that kind of conversation over an unsecured network, where you are talking about things like methods of strikes against the Houthis and the exact timing of the strikes, we are lucky that American pilots and American sailors did not lose their lives. Every single one of them should have known better. Every single one of them could have said, hey, we should not be having this conversation here. We should do it through the proper secured channels. Not a single one of them did that. And it raises a lot of questions. You know, is this the only time? Presumably not. Have they been having other classified conversations that could put people's lives in risk on unsecured networks? Were they using personal phones, personal devices, which would be even less secure? I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions here, but this is what happens when you have people who are completely unqualified and frankly incompetent in sensitive roles.
You called it an unsecured network. We should just point out Signal is an encrypted app. The concern, of course, is that the adversaries could get onto the phone, and that encryption then doesn't work. But I am just curious, do you have Signal on your phone?
Yeah, but I never discuss classified information through it. Listen, I'm a member of the Homeland Security Committee. I'm in my 3rd year as the ranking member for counterterrorism and intelligence.
Right.
So I receive classified briefings at least once a month, sometimes more. I handle quite a bit of classified information as part of my job. I have never once, and it would never even occur to me, to discuss that information through Signal, through a text message, through anything that wasn't a secure, government-managed channel. And you know, even as members of Congress, rank and file members, they teach us when we get there, do not ever discuss classified information outside of a secure setting or without a secure channel.
Well, we should just point out the White House's defense is none of this was classified that was discussed. I understand, and time will tell, but
that's not. I mean, that's clearly untrue, right? When you're talking about the exact timing and the exact methods of strikes on an adversary, if that information were to get to that adversary, then pilots and sailors' lives would be put at risk.
And if that's not classified, what is?
Exactly. I think everybody understands that. And rather than just take responsibility and admit that they screwed up, the administration's response has been to either lie about what information was discussed, they got caught in that lie when further text messages were released, or to try to play it off like it's not a big deal when clearly it is. There need to be consequences. If any rank and file member of the military or the intelligence services had done this, they would be fired. And so people have gotten fired and actually been put in prison for doing this and being so careless. And so there needs to be consequences. But again, you know, this is what happens when, for example, you put someone like Pete Hegseth, who has no management experience to speak of, no experience as a senior military leader in charge of the Defense Department. This is what happens when you put unserious people like Tulsi Gabbard in charge of our nation's intelligence services. They are going to make mistakes, and we are lucky that this particular mistake did not cost people's lives.
I have one quick follow-up question, a simple one before we move on. okay, these are powerful government officials. They're all over the world. They're trying to talk about something important. They can't all be in the Situation Room together because they're in different places. How are they supposed to be discussing something in real time?
So there's two ways that people can discuss classified information if they're not in Washington, D.C. The first is by using something called a SCIF. It's a secure room that has specifically been designed to make it difficult for adversaries to listen into what's being discussed. And yes, we have SCIFs in Washington, D.C. You typically leave your phones and personal devices outside so that they can't be.
Some of these officials have them in their homes.
Exactly, and so that's the point. That's the point I was going to make. Is that the U.S. government does have SCIFs all across the country and even in other countries as well. We have SCIFs here in Rhode Island, where I get briefings sometimes. So that's one option. The second option is for the most senior people, people like Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance. They have people who travel with them who can set up secure communications channels, sort of informal SCIFs, if you will, wherever they are at any given time. So they had options for how to have these conversations through secure channels. They chose not to. And again, the question is why? And is this something that they do often? We have questions that need answers.
Well, another question on a different topic that people want answered is whether Chuck Schumer did the right thing or the wrong thing on voting for the Keep the Government Open, the government funding bill. You voted no, as did, I think, did Jared Golden vote yes, maybe? Almost everyone voted no on this in the House. And then it passed the Senate with a couple Democrats. I've read about massive frustration inside your caucus among House Democrats about how Schumer and a few Senate Democrats handled this. We should note that Senator Reid and Whitehouse both voted no. They didn't side with Schumer on that. Do you share the frustration?
Yeah, so my view is this. The actions of the Trump administration are so beyond the pale. Trying to cut health care and close down Social Security offices and cut food aid, all the fun tax cuts for the rich, cozying up with Vladimir Putin and other dictators, ignoring court orders and acting like the president is above the law, so far beyond the pale that we as Democrats need to use every tool at our disposal and every point of leverage to try to put guardrails around this administration. And look, I'm a bipartisan person. I've had plenty of bills that I've worked on with Republican members, including J.D. Vance when he was a senator, actually. But what the administration is doing is so beyond the pale, we should be using every tool at our disposal to put guardrails on. That's why I, along with the rest of the Rhode Island delegation, voted against the CR, because we saw that as an opportunity to try to exert some leverage. It's disappointing to me that Senator Schumer and some of the other Senate Democrats saw it differently. Our leadership, I think, realizes between the House and the Senate that they need to get on the same page going forward so that when other opportunities present themselves, we're better aligned and we're better prepared.
I hear you on, the steps the Trump administration is taking, their policies, and I believe you that you feel that way. But just yesterday, we had a UNH poll out that showed President Trump's approval rating at 40% in Rhode Island. No sign of drop-off from the election. Yeah. And knowing the two districts, and your district, the more purple one, that means he's probably somewhere between 40 and 50% approval. So how do you square that circle, that you feel he is outside the 80-yard lines of how American politics is run, and yet maybe close to half the constituents you represent like what they see?
So two things. First of all, my mantra has always been that I will work with both sides, both parties, when it's good for Rhode Island. And again, I've introduced plenty of bipartisan bills. I'm working with Chip Roy from the House Freedom Caucus, a very conservative member, on my bill to ban members of Congress from trading stocks. I had a bill with J.D. Vance on student loan relief for kids with disabilities when he was in the Senate. So I will work with anyone, including the administration, when it's good for Rhode Island.
But they're approving of these policies.
However, at the same time, we have to stand up when the administration goes too far. And the polling shows, while President Trump's approval rating is down a bit from the election, his specific actions are almost uniformly unpopular. He is underwater significantly on the economy. People do not like these tariffs. He is underwater in the approval rating of Elon Musk has fallen off a cliff. People do not like Elon Musk and his army of interns going around shutting down Social Security offices and wreaking havoc. So, and they certainly don't agree with President Trump's foreign policy posture, talk about invading Greenland and Canada and all of this cozying up to Vladimir Putin. So, what I am seeing is that there may be people who voted for Trump, including in Rhode Island, who like some of what he's doing. But those same people disagree with many of the things that he's doing, and it's our job to stand up to him when necessary.
We got to take a break here on Newsmakers. As the Congressman said, he's a member of the House Committee on Homeland Security. When we come back, we're going to talk to him about that Tufts University student who was taken into custody. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers.
To do that.
Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Congressman Seth Magaziner. So, Congressman, we want to talk about the detention of a Tufts University student, a Turkish national, Rümeysa Öztürk. She was captured on video being taken into custody on a sidewalk in Somerville. As I pointed out in the first half, you are House Committee on the House Committee on Homeland Security. We have the video up now, and I'm just curious, what was your reaction, first reaction when you saw it?
Yeah, so I'm always careful to not comment on specific cases until we have all the facts. But what I will say is a couple things. First, yes, as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I understand we need secure borders and secure ports of entry. But we also need an executive branch that follows the law and that abides by court orders. And I am concerned that, at least in some of these cases, it appears that the administration has not been doing that. I'm also concerned that in some cases, including potentially with the Tufts student, although again, I want to be careful because we don't know all the facts yet, the only rationale that the administration has come out with so far is that some of these individuals were expressing political beliefs, writing op-eds in school newspapers, things like that, that were critical of U.S. foreign policy. If we believe in free speech, then just criticizing the government's policy should not be grounds for deportation, unless there are other facts in the case that we just don't know about yet.
So kind of zooming out to your point, not getting specific into this case, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has defended removing students that are here on a visa from the country. The administration is using a measure where the Secretary of State can remove a non-citizen if they are deemed a threat to the country's foreign policy interests. And I just want to play a little bit of sound from Secretary Rubio on that defense. Here it is.
We let them in our country to study. We gave them a visa because they said, I want to go to your university, I want to get a degree. They didn't say, I want to go to university and I want to vandalize your library and I want to chase Jewish students down the street. People pay a lot of money to go to these schools. They borrow money to go to these schools, and you can't even go to class because some lunatic who's covering their face is running through campus, spray painting things, harassing people, and they're in my country as a guest. We want them out.
So, Congressman, what he's saying there may ring true to a lot of people.
For sure. And listen, anti-Semitism is a real problem in this country, and particularly on college campuses. And that's something that, as a person of Jewish heritage, I feel very deeply. And if someone has been convicted of a crime, committed a crime, vandalism, harassment, etc., then I think it's legitimate to ask questions about whether those people should continue to be in the United States if they are here as guests. But again, my understanding is with some of these cases, they are not alleging crimes. They are merely alleging the offering of opinions that are contrary to the current administration's policy. So again, I think that the appropriate place for this to be worked out is in court. And I am hopeful and insistent that the administration abide by court orders in these individual cases, whatever they may be. Because, look, we need an immigration system that is safe, that is fair, and that is orderly. We need real immigration reform in this country, but we also need to stay true to our values.
Your colleague Andrew Clyde, Georgia Republican, is introducing an impeachment resolution that targets Rhode Island U.S. Chief Judge John McConnell. There aren't the votes in the Senate to remove a judge. It almost never happens in American history. Putting that to one side, do you see an appetite with House GOP leadership to pursue these resolutions, or do you expect them to be bottled up in committee?
Yeah, unfortunately, what I've seen in my time in the House is that my Republican colleagues often bow down to the most extreme members of their caucus, even when they know it's not right. In this case, this is clearly political theater, not a serious push for impeachment, because in this country we don't impeach judges just because some people may disagree with their decisions. The proper way to handle a disagreement with a judge's decision is to appeal it to a higher court. We've never impeached a judge in this country just because somebody disagreed with their opinion. So this is clearly political. It is out of step with our separation of powers under the Constitution. But I do think it's part of a larger movement among Donald Trump and some of his closest allies to try to intimidate judges and put pressure on them to rule in the administration's favor. So if this does advance through the House, I'll certainly speak out forcefully against it. I don't expect that it will lead to a conviction in the Senate, as you said, because there's no legal basis for it. But we cannot allow Donald Trump and his allies to intimidate judges, and that's what this is really about.
Congressman, we got to go to a break in a little over a minute here, and I have to ask you about your living situation. I last reported you were still living in the 1st congressional district at the time. In that story, you said renovations on a home in the 2nd were going slowly. I should point out to our viewers, you are not required by law to live in the 1st congressional district, but you did pledge to move to the 2nd. Where does that stand?
Yeah. So my wife and I bought a house in Cranston with the intention of renovating it and moving in. But frankly, our family circumstances have changed. My wife got a new job that requires her to commute to Cambridge, about a 2-hour commute. We had a new baby, and as you noted, the house in Cranston ended up needing a lot more work than we expected. So we've decided that at this point it makes sense for us to stay in our house in Providence. That's the right thing for our family. But I do want to emphasize, and this is important, living 1 mile from the district line has in no way impeded my ability to do my job and deliver for my constituents. I brought back millions of dollars of federal funding for every community in my district. I continue to fight for the working people of the 2nd Congressional District with legislation in Washington, and I'll continue to show up and deliver just as I have for the last 2.5 years.
For people who are saying that's an about-face on your campaign promise.
Our circumstances changed. Sometimes in life, circumstances change, and so I have to do what's best for my family, but also will continue to deliver for my constituents just as I have for the last 2 years.
So real quick, did you sell the house in Cranston that you had purchased, or do you still own it, or what are your plans?
We still own it.
Okay.
We're figuring it out.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break on Newsmakers. When we come back, are there any tariffs the Congressman actually likes? Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This is 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Congressman Seth Magaziner. Ted?
In all the years I've covered you, Congressman, you've always been a big organized labor guy. I just saw a tweet yesterday from the United Auto Workers praising President Trump's tariffs on foreign car makers, and I've seen some Democrats make positive noises about tariffs. Jared Golden, Elizabeth Warren. Do you have any misgivings where you're like, oh, he's getting a beat on us on the protecting American workers side of things?
The number one issue I hear from working Rhode Islanders is that the cost of living is too high. And there may be a place for targeted tariffs, particularly with high value add manufacturing like auto manufacturing. But the way Donald Trump is doing this with across the board tariffs on everything coming from Canada, Mexico, et cetera, the EU, is just going to raise costs for consumers. It's going to raise costs on energy, which is already too expensive here in Rhode Island. It's going to raise costs on food, on fruits and vegetables. We in this climate can't grow tropical fruits and vegetables all year round, but we eat them all year round. So this is going to raise costs, and it's going to hurt people. It's also going to hurt the manufacturing sector here in Rhode Island. I mean, tariffs on metals, on steel and aluminum, are going to impact the defense industry here in Rhode Island and drive up their costs. The jewelry industry in Rhode Island is going to be impacted by tariffs because we import a lot of the stones that go into jewelry that's made in Rhode Island from Canada. We get, I believe, 15% of our energy from Canada. So the kinds of tariffs that Donald Trump is rushing forward with are going to raise costs on Rhode Islanders, hurt working people, hurt manufacturing more often than it helps. And so again, there may be times where targeted tariffs make sense in certain industries, but the way that Donald Trump is doing this is bad for Rhode Islanders, for sure.
I want to go back to politics and Ted's question from the first half of the program on Leader Schumer. There's been some national reporting that your party's sort of having a Tea Party moment where there's so much frustration within the party that there will be, and we're already starting to see it, primaries for more progressive candidates to the left of, kind of rank and file Democrats. Are you feeling that? Are you seeing that?
There may be some of that, but what I'm seeing more anger directed toward is Donald Trump and the Republicans. I mean, you've seen my Republican colleagues in Congress are canceling their town halls because they don't want to face their own constituents who are upset about tariffs and Elon Musk cutting Social Security offices and all the rest. You saw Democrats just last week win a state Senate race in Pennsylvania that had gone for Trump by double digits. They just pulled back the nomination of Elise Stefanik from New York to be UN ambassador because they were worried about losing her district in a special election, a district where Trump had more than 60% of the vote. So yeah, there is a real energy and I think a real anger among lots of voters, not just the Democratic base, but across the board. Sometimes that motivates people to engage in primaries, but I think more often that fire is going to be directed at these Republican members of Congress who need to be held accountable in the midterms.
Your annual Women's Lunch fundraiser is coming up, and one of your invited guests is Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She's been under fire this week for referring to Governor Abbott of Texas, who of course uses a wheelchair, as Governor Hot Wheels. You succeeded the first quadriplegic in Congress.
Yeah.
Was that appropriate?
Yeah, so Congresswoman Crockett is a fighter at a time when people want fighters in Congress, and she's one of the most effective debaters against the Republicans in the United States Congress. In terms of that comment that she made, I believe that she clarified it in a statement afterwards to say that she was not referring to his physical limitations.
When Trump does something like that, Democrats, they don't take the
clarification. Yeah, and frankly, when Trump insults people's appearance, ability, et cetera, Republicans never seem to mind either. So listen, I take her at her word. I'm excited that she's coming here to support me in my campaign. Again, I think that she is a very valued friend and colleague.
So it's just going to be Thunderdome politics? Just each time one side ratchets further, we're going to ratchet the other way?
Look, I take her at her word. She made a clarifying statement afterwards.
Kind of an off the side one for you. A Republican Congresswoman from Florida has proposed a rule change in the House that would allow lawmakers who are new parents to vote by proxy. So they would not need to be at the Capitol to cast their vote. What do you think of that measure?
Hugely needed, and I can speak from personal experience on this. My daughter Lucy was born last year the day before we took a series of important votes on funding for Ukraine, funding for the Middle East, and other national security priorities. And I had to leave my one-day-old baby and wife in the hospital to fly to D.C. to take those votes. And then, frankly, I had to miss some other votes after that otherwise I would have wanted to, of course, to participate in. So I think that this bill is very important. If we want to have younger people in Congress, if we want to have people, who are of the age where they have young kids, then we need to make it easier for people to vote remotely in Congress, at least in those months after a child is born.
Is there a generation gap on this? Where the older leadership in Congress just doesn't see it the way millennials do?
Potentially. I think that if we can get a vote on this, and there's a procedural move now to try to force a vote, I think that there will be unanimous support on the Democratic side. The Republicans' leadership is pushing really hard against this, but I know there are a handful of younger Republican members who are bucking their leadership and hopefully will not be pressured out of those positions, that position. This is, to me, very common sense. If we want Congress to really represent the population that we serve, we've got to make it easier for younger people to be in Congress. And proxy voting for, at the very least, new parents, I think makes all the sense in the world.
All right, Congressman, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us on the program. If you've missed any of it, it's on WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We will see you next week on Newsmakers.